I want to talk about the broader budget parameters shortly, but I want to pick up with the vaccine rollout. The Prime Minister nor the Treasurer couldn't guarantee that all Australians would be fully vaccinated by the end of this year. So that still does create a fair bit of uncertainty looking ahead to next year.
Absolutely, and it just takes one breakout to put a big hole in the budget, or a further hole in the budget. And there's also not a plan for quarantine. The government had two jobs this year to get right. The vaccination rollout and quarantine, they've bungled both.
At the same time, when the Treasurer got to his speech last night and unveiled all this spending in traditional labour areas like health, disability services, aged care, did you have a moment of political panic?
This is a budget for Scott Morrison's short-term political future, not for Australia's future. Their heart's not in it. Take childcare.
The spending's certainly in it.
Well, bits of it. Take childcare. They spent $1.7 billion. They say that will add $1.5 billion to the economy each and every year. So they've acknowledged the issue that if you invest in childcare, you get workforce participation, you boost productivity, there's a dividend from it. It's an investment in Australia's future as well as in our children. But they will help 1 in every 4 families that Labor's plan that we announced last year that they said wasn't necessary will assist. Take aged care. They've adopted some of the recommendations of the Aged Care Royal Commission, issues of hours in which nurses and carers should be able to see aged care residents. But what they haven't done is do it on the same time frame, and there's not the next stage. That was seen to be the first step. There's nothing there also about wages in terms of aged care workers.
I hear what you're saying about the spending, but I can't imagine Labor opposing any of these spending measures. Is there anything in this budget that you'll say no to when it comes up to a vote inside the building here?
Well, we of course don't block supply. That happened down the road here in 1975. But
you can oppose certain budget measures, though.
But we'll look at measures. It depends how it's legislated. We'll look at every bit of legislation. But
is there anything that, looking at the budget papers, that you think, wow, that's really bad, Labor's going to vote against that particular initiative?
Well, the problem that's really bad, Michael, is that there's no long-term plan for Australia's future to set us up. Where's the big new infrastructure projects, for example? They spoke about $10 billion extra. When you look at the budget papers, there's a $3.3 billion cut in infrastructure investment over the next 4 years. Peak debt comes at 2025 at 41% of GDP. When it was 15, they said there was a crisis. We have $1 trillion of debt, but no legacy for it. If you look back with the GFC, what did we have? The National Broadband Network, fibre to every home and premise, is what we were envisaging before this government brought in copper, last century's technology. We had major infrastructure projects. We completed the duplication of the Hume. We upgraded the Pacific Highway. We had major rail projects right around Australia. We had paid parental leave. We had things that made a real permanent difference. This government haven't done that. It's all about short-term political expediency, and wages are going to not keep up with the cost of living over the next 4 years. That's the damning indictment of this government in its own budget papers.
A couple of very quick questions because you've got to go. Labor is spending more on childcare. That's acknowledged. Do you see an opening, though, when you deliver your budget reply speech tomorrow night to spend more on aged care? Advocates are welcoming the $18 billion, but say it's not enough.
Well, of course there will need to be more when it comes to aged care, particularly around workforce issues.
Will Labor spend more?
You'll have to wait and see, Michael, in the fullness of time. But what we'll do is set out a plan whereby every dollar that we invest will be about Australia's future, will be about building up the resilience of our economy. What the government's tried to do is just try and get back to where we were, but with an enormous amount of debt. No productivity improvements, no wage improvements for Australians. The outlook, very low economic growth into the future. It declines from the bounce that you'd expect from this massive stimulus. So this is a government that I think is really just focused on the next election. And we know that last year, JobMaker, 450,000 new jobs they said they'd create, it only created 1,000. So look at what they do, not just what they say.
Just very, very quickly, the Prime Minister told us on the show that the election is next year. His words. Do you believe him?
Well, the election's due next year. If they go early, it'll be because they think things are going to get a lot worse. And people will notice the fact that their wages aren't increasing and that a lot of this government's plan that never matches up to its rhetoric. That gap between announcement and delivery will be exposed, as it has each and every year of the last 8 years.
As the choir warms up in the background, we'll leave it there. Anthony Albanese, thank you.
Thanks very much.